A single social media post triggered an 11% drop in oil prices. 17 hours later, that drop vanished. Ships turned around, gunboats fired, and Iran's own foreign minister was recalled to Tehran. This is not a story about a failed announcement. It is a story about who actually controls Iran and why that question now determines whether the Strait of Hormuz ever truly reopens. On April 17th, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi posted on X that, in line with the Lebanon ceasefire, the Strait of Hormuz was completely open to all commercial vessels for the remainder of the truce. The Foreign Ministry spokesperson immediately reinforced the message, framing it as consistent with the April 8th ceasefire agreement. Markets reacted instantly. Oil fell 11% in a single session. That is an enormous move in global energy markets. Tankers that had been sitting idle for weeks began moving. Shipping trackers showed vessels attempting to exit the Gulf. President Trump celebrated publicly at a Turning Point USA event in Phoenix, calling it a great and brilliant day for the world. Traders recalibrated risk models. The world exhaled. 17 hours later, Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf erased that optimism with 4 words: with the continuation of the blockade. The Strait of Hormuz will not remain open. The ships turned around. The URG fired on a merchant vessel attempting to cross. Iran's state media openly criticized its own foreign minister. And the delegation Araghchi was leading was recalled to Tehran not voluntarily, but by order. Those 17 hours revealed something more important than a broken ceasefire. They revealed a fracture inside Iran's power structure that no external negotiation can ignore. Let's walk through what actually happened. Araghchi's post was specific. The Strait of Hormuz was open for all commercial vessels during the 10-day Lebanon ceasefire. It looked official. It looked clean. It looked like a coordinated signal. Oil dropped 11%. That drop reflected the removal of a geopolitical risk premium that had been embedded in every barrel since the strait was closed. Tankers began moving. The U.S. president publicly declared success. Then the URG intervened. Within hours, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued its own conditions for transit: civilian vessels only transit through Iran's designated route, no military ships, no vessels linked to hostile countries, and coordination required with Iranian forces. These were not mentioned in Araghchi's post. They effectively turned open into a managed checkpoint. Then Ghalibaf made the decisive statement tying Hormuz to the American blockade of Iranian ports. If the blockade continues, he said, the strait will not remain open. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a power struggle. Iran's own state-aligned media outlets, including Mehr and Tasnim, criticized Araghchi directly. They did not say he misspoke. They said his announcement gave President Trump a propaganda victory. They described his post as incomplete and misleading, lacking necessary details about conditions and mechanisms. These are not opposition outlets. Tasnim is linked to the URG. When they attack the foreign minister in print, they are signaling that he exceeded his mandate. Sources reported that during negotiations, Araghchi had shown flexibility on Iran's support for the so-called axis of resistance, including Hezbollah, that reportedly triggered objections from Mohammad Bagher Zolgadar, secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council. A report was submitted to senior leadership and URG commanders citing deviation from mandate. The delegation was ordered home. Araghchi did not return because talks ended. He was recalled because he moved in a direction the URG had not authorized. That is the core of the story. To understand why this fracture matters, you have to rewind to February 28th, when the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury. Coordinated strikes removed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei from command. Iran's defense minister, URG leadership figures, and naval commanders were also removed from operational chains of command. The result was not a weakened but unified adversary. It was a fragmented system. Iran's foreign ministry operates with one mandate, the URG operates with another. The Supreme National Security Council sits somewhere in between, and without Khamenei's authority to impose coherence, no single actor can enforce unity. Araghchi's tweet and Ghalibaf's response were two institutions speaking from two different mandates. The foreign ministry opened the strait. The URG controls the gunboats. When those collide, the gunboats win. The oil market understood this before headlines did. Before the crisis, Brent crude traded below $70 per barrel. After Iran declared the strait closed on March 2nd and attacked shipping, prices surged past $100. Even approaching $125, March 2026 recorded the largest monthly oil price increase in history. When Araghchi announced the reopening, oil fell 11% almost instantly. That was traders pricing in restored free passage. When the URG imposed conditions and Ghalibaf reversed course, that drop reversed. Markets learned something critical. A statement from Iran's foreign ministry does not guarantee operational reality. Now layer in the American side. President Trump did not verify the announcement before celebrating it publicly. His immediate declaration of victory became part of the backlash inside Iran. Iranian state outlets explicitly argued that Araghchi had handed Trump a propaganda win. That celebration then became political justification for hardliners to close the strait again. The feedback loop was brutal and fast. Araki opens the strait. Trump celebrates. Hardliners frame that as capitulation. The erg closes the strait. The ships turn around. The sequencing problem that doomed the negotiations is structural. Iran's position. Open the strait once the American blockade of Iranian ports lifts. The U.S. position. The blockade remains until the deal is completed. Open first or deal first. Neither side wants to move second. The Lebanon ceasefire was the diplomatic hook Araki used to frame the reopening. It provided cover. It suggested mutual de-escalation. The erg reframed it around the blockade, not Lebanon. Their concern was economic strangulation, not optics in Beirut. This distinction matters. Iran is being squeezed from multiple directions: military degradation, oil export collapse, and internal economic pressure. Oil revenue that normally runs around $13 billion per month has been effectively severed. Storage capacity is filling. While shutdown timelines approach, domestic unrest simmers. The erg's calculus appears to be this: opening the strait without lifting the blockade yields no leverage and no economic relief. Closing it maintains pressure, even if painful. From their perspective, an open strait under blockade conditions is worse than a closed one. The United States faces a parallel calculus. The blockade is leverage. Lift it prematurely and leverage evaporates. The ceasefire expires on April 22nd, 4 days from now. Trump has suggested a second round of talks in Islamabad. If that happens, it will occur in the shadow of Iraqi's recall. Whoever represents Iran next will know what happened to him. They will know that flexibility carries consequences, that narrows the negotiating space dramatically. The Cuban Missile Crisis lasted 13 days and was resolved through carefully structured concessions that allowed both Kennedy and Khrushchev to claim strategic wins, without public humiliation that required back channels and restraint. In this case, Iraqi's flexibility was punished internally, and Trump's public celebration reinforced hardline resistance. The structural conditions that made 1962 solvable are not present here in the same form. Hormuz is no longer just a choke point. It is a trap, and on April 17th it snapped shut on Iran's own foreign minister. 17 hours did not produce peace. They exposed the real power center inside Iran, and until that internal fracture is resolved, every announcement about Hormuz will carry an asterisk. The question now is not whether the strait can reopen for a few hours. It is whether any agreement can survive the gap between the foreign ministry that negotiates and the erg that controls the ships. April 22nd is approaching. The second round of talks, the ceasefire deadline, and congressional war powers timelines are converging in the same window. The world is watching Hormuz, but the real story is happening inside Tehran.